With anime, the history of animation of Japan as my source of information to study, I suppose it cannot really begin anywhere except with the Magic Lantern, the first real animated images that were broadcast onto walls or anything really. In the 17th century, it began to be produced. By the 18th century, it began to be used for education. In the 19th century, it was a product of very much innovation, and the method of actually using it to show short movies was amazing. Usable for drawn slides as much as anything else, it showed one thing: that you could actually make images move. With the cinemas releasing actual live-action films, animators studied the project and saw how they could actually draw their own slides and put them through a film projector. Doing this was hard work at first and expensive. In 1907, the first known anime is a 3-second clip of a sailor boy. By the 1930s, animation became an alternative format of storytelling compared to the underdeveloped live-action industry in Japan. For unlike America, live-action industry in Japan remained a small market and suffered from budgeting, location, and casting restrictions. Western-looking actors being unavailable made it impossible to shoot films set in Europe, America, or fantasy worlds that do not naturally involve Japan. Varied use of animation allowed artists to create any characters and settings. Anime as a genre isn't especially marketed towards or created for children. Anime genres are incredibly broad and include action, adventure, children's stories, comedy, drama, erotica, medieval fantasy, occult horror, romance, mecha, the giant floating robots, which I mean, since science fiction is a separate genre, I can only assume at some point we're going to have actual giant fighting robots in the world. The early 1900s of animation was an age of silent films at first. Many trial and errors with drawings of cutout animation techniques based on animated shorts from France and the United States. People talked about high-quality Japanese manga films. Japanese anime proved costly to produce than Western animations. Being overshadowed by Disney cartoons did not help. Facing uphill battles from the start, one of the things that helped them find a niche was anime production for public relations and publicity campaigns by public institutions. Domestic production was beginning to develop a small but solid foundation when Tokyo and surrounding areas suffered catastrophic damage in the Great Kanto earthquake of 1923. The anime industry was forced to start over from scratch, which is kind of like God kicking the anthill over and saying, "Not that way, try something else." Or maybe it was something else, who knows. The industry continued to struggle, unable to respond adequately to successful innovations, including the appearance of the first talkies in 1929 and color film in 1932. During this, Fuji Noburo won international claim for Bagaduja no Tazaki, and I butchered that, of course, the thief of Baguda Castle. He made by cutting and pasting chiyagami, Japanese colored paper. His film is remembered as the first to make its presence felt outside Japan. You saw a small clip of it in this, actually. I didn't really point it out, though. Film studio controls and introduction of foreign animation became a thing by the 1930s. Despite the world depression and political turmoil, Japan had a thriving film industry. Vertical integration made Japanese film studios stronger for having their own theaters, just as America had their own theaters for their studios. With the guaranteed outlets for films, allowed economies to scale that made Hollywood so strong and Japan strong. Japanese film directors, however, had more autonomy in story selection rather than the way that Hollywood had it. Screenwriting, cinematography, and editing, all but a few directors working on Hollywood's assembly line, had nothing like that. The 1940s. With Allied occupation following the end of World War II, Japan was exposed to over a decade's worth of American animation that had been banned under the wartime government. Thus the seeds were sown for decades of revolutionary Japanese anime. But before the occupation began, there was one thing. With the shortage of supplies, even for animation, there managed to be one full-length theatrical film made. Momotaro's Divine Sea Warriors, produced by the Navy, of course, as a war effort. It came out just before the end of the war, was propagandistic film to lift morale and commitment to the war effort. It's actually quite an interesting story. I watched it for the most part. And the gist of it is, as long as we work together and put all our effort into it, we will win. Great moral, but, it doesn't always work. But you can't really get anywhere unless you do that, so if you want to get anywhere, you have to do that. In the post-war propagandas, the general headquarters of the Allied occupation, GHQ, brought together 100 anime artists in the bombed-out ruins of Tokyo to form the Shin Nihon Dagasha, the New Japan Animation Company. The aim was to make it easier to spread occupation policies by having the artists produce anime in praise of democracy. Many artists were, however, fiercely independent and territorial, and the company was riven by disagreements from the outset. The project strayed off course and eventually disbanded. Even GHQ threw in the towel. The switch from militarism to democracy was not going to be so easy. Of course, there were probably a few artists who got put into the military for Japan because they refused to bow. So, naturally, those that were left were those willing to actually do propaganda and do things their own way. Or perhaps all Japanese just were extremely independent. It's really difficult to tell. A new era of peace and prosperity in animation. The Disney era. The start of Toei Doga, now Toei Animation, was during these years as Japan began to recover from the disastrous war. The Okawa Hiroshi, president of the Toei Film Company, saw Disney's Snow White, 1937. He was overwhelmed by the gorgeous color. In 1956, he built a modern studio, a white-walled palace with air conditioning, as people called it, and founded Toei Doga, Toei Animation, his ambition to become the Disney of the East. With this came the seeking of knowledge to actually become a rival to Disney. They had to invite people from the Disney system who could actually do it over and to help them learn how to actually produce the industrial line to create animation like Disney. These mentors were highly valued and stayed as guests in Japan for a while. With jobs hard to come by in post-war Japan, the company was able to attract many outstanding team members for their work. Though they had low starting salaries, the government's drive to double people's income started to take effect. Wages shot up, and the company soon found itself in the red. With this, newer and more difficult times came. A manga festival held every year during the springtime, during school holidays, and in later years during the summer vacation as well, were falling. The company's financial future was uncertain. The labor movement also gained momentum. With disputes and the like, Takahata Asao and Miyazaki Hayao, now with Studio Ghibli, began their careers at Toei Doga. Takahata entered the company in 1959, Miyazaki in 1963. Both were active members of the labor union, Takahata serving as vice chairman and Miyazaki as secretary general. Among the company was one called Tezuka, who invested his own income from manga publishing into the company to postpone the loss issues. It was a generous gesture typical of the one they called the god of manga. Merchandising became very much an important part of manga and anime. The most popular genre dealt with science fiction and space in anime, followed by shows about girls with magical powers. In 1968, the popular baseball-themed Kyojin no Hoshi, Star of the Giants, began, followed by something called Sazae-san, a family drama, which continues to this day as the longest-running series in anime history. But not every series could be a winner, and with the glut on the market, competition intensified. However, in 1963, the very first animated TV show came out. A show about a robotic boy. with all this happening, shows like Space Battleship Yamato came out. The real goal of anime is difficult to say beyond pleasing people and making the culture stronger and better. If there's any single goal behind anime besides making a profit, or actually making something for kids to watch and adults to watch and entertain people, perhaps it's to actually unify the culture and teach lessons. I can't say that for sure, but one such as Hayao Miyazaki might say that the real goal of his anime is to teach the importance of nature and the value of it triumphing over technology. It's in every real show and animation he does that has his personal touch to it, where he has control. In the end, I've got to say myself, I love anime. It's a fun ability to just sit back and watch a story unfold. It's not about being animated. It's just about watching the protagonist evolve, experience life, go through their own transformation of, and maybe sometimes they learn a lesson, and we learn a lesson through them. And at the end of the day, we just want them to have the good life that we don't always have for ourselves. And sometimes we want to see the confrontations for the things that we ourselves don't fight over. We look for meaning in our lives, and we look for meaning in our animations. Whether they're there or not, I cannot answer. But I think the real goal of most animators is just to make people happy so that they watch, and so that they have something to talk about. With all that said, thank you. Have a good day. Oh, and please enjoy the rest of this. I included some extra animations in the references. At the very bottom of the references is like 3 short animated films from the earliest periods of animation that I could find. And I actually was entertained by watching them. I would have clipped them onto the end of this video, but then I thought that might be too much, so I put a few in here and I left the rest for you to find on your own if you want to click on the references. I think it's worth it. Just a few minutes each for the most part.